Welcome back to Not Your Mama's History. My name is Cheney, and today we're going to be talking about the weaponization of Dr. Martin Luther King's nonviolent strategy in order to distract from peaceful protest and silence conversations around police brutality here in the United States. First, I want to say my opinions are my own and they do not reflect the opinions of my employers or partners. So this is part of my Problematic Monday series on Instagram. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that every Monday I post something that is problematic and needs a bit more explanation because some people find it hard to understand why it's problematic, racist, or sexist. So I delve a little bit deeper into it and give a little bit more explanation. I'm thinking about once a month taking one of my Problematic Mondays from the month on Instagram and looking at the comment section, answering some of your questions in the comment section, or even talking about some of the comments that I received. For this month's Problematic Monday that I'm picking for my YouTube channel, I am picking the Martin Luther King meme that I saw going around. I was just so frustrated with it that I really wanted to share with you all. So I'll put it up here. And it says, looted nothing, burned nothing, attacked no one, changed the world. And it's an image of Dr. Martin Luther King. There's so many levels of problematic here. So I'm just gonna delve and just flat out read what I posted on my Problematic Monday. For today's Problematic Monday, I want to highlight the problematic nature of mainly white people weaponizing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s nonviolent strategy and white-splaining his legacy largely in an attempt to discredit protesters, shut down conversations, and shame Black Americans who are angry. When you post this meme or ones like it, you let me know that you haven't studied the civil rights movement beyond a few images. I have noticed a trend, a predictable trend. A police officer murders a Black man. There are largely peaceful protests. A small number of people start to smash and vandalize and loot. Americans turn the conversation from murder to vandalism and theft of items, and little is done. And I did include a quote from the LA editorial board because I think that their words were just so clear on looting here. And no, police violence does not justify the rampages that erupted in Minneapolis. But as the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. pointed out more than a half century ago, a riot is the language of the unheard. To focus on the damage and looting misses the point. Were it not for the killing of Floyd and the history of police behavior, there would have been no protest. I think they explained that so well. On to the rest of my post. Nonviolent protest was a strategy purposely used to highlight the brutality of the state. Remember that Dr. King's strategy failed in places such as Albany, where local government officials ensured police forces used kid gloves or gentle handling when handling protesters. Even though the police force today is using violence in isolated cases, it is not enough to make a nonviolent response effective in certain respects. Strong centralized leadership, a smaller number of civil rights organizations, and coordination between these groups ensured that King and other civil rights leaders in the 60s had far more control over the protest spaces. These people trained together on how to remain peaceful. Today, anyone independently or from thousands of civil rights organizations around the world can show up at a protest, meaning we have less control over what goes on at protest. Dr. King used the threat of his absence, aka Malcolm X, and violence as a bargaining chip to get to the table. This was a war, and nonviolence was a weapon. He strategically knew when to bring it out or conveniently remove it to remind the government that what happens if he is not present. Do you remember that we tried nonviolent protest? Colin Kaepernick. Protests are supposed to be disruptive. If you had to set a time and place for a protest that meant it was least disruptive to everyone, then you're doing it wrong. We have gotten fat and happy on the scraps thrown to us. To boil his legacy down to he stood around peacefully feeds into the safe, docile, good Negro versus the agitating, violent, bad Negro. This strategy was intentional and genius for its time. So that's what I wrote for my post. Now I'm going to delve into some of the comments that I got from some of you all. I want to make this very clear that I try very hard to monitor my comment section so that people who don't agree with me aren't shut down, because I think it's important that my ideas are challenged and what I say is challenged, because then I am no better than people who just sit there saying la la la, all my ideas are good. So I just hope that I never make decisions or things in a vacuum, and I'm always listening to different people. And I think that's kind of what made me successful as an interpreter, because I grew up around a lot of conservative people as well as a lot of liberal people. So I had a very well-rounded upbringing when it comes to looking at politics. So I can really understand where people are coming from. And so I think it makes you a better interpreter and you can better talk to people one-on-one. But just saying, I really want you all to feel comfortable that if you disagree or if you have a question, that you can always comment down below. All right, when you post and I use one of your comments, I am going to scratch out your last name just so I don't want anyone to come after anyone, or let's let people have their comments, and as long as it's respectful, let's be civil to one another. A lot of people get both Dr. King and Malcolm X wrong. Surprising, since both their writings and speeches are easy to find. Never trust what someone said. Go view and read them in your own words. Thank you so much, Jim. I actually was looking through my library and I collected some books that that's why I know a lot about Dr. Martin Luther King, because I read a lot about him, both from his own words, from his speeches, as well as what historians, when historians start to analyze the civil rights movement. So I've kind of put together a list of things that I think may be helpful to you all. So I think right off the bat, you need to read Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s autobiography. He tells you about his life from his own perspective. I think go read it. It's straight off the bat. Also, it's on Audible. So if you're not a reader, that's fine. A truck passed. So there's also The Freedom Walkers. This is by, I think it's by Russell Friedman. I think it is. I'll check it. I'll put it up for you. And then, okay, Taylor Branch. He wrote a 3-part series on the King years, the civil rights movement, and it's amazing. The first one is Parting the Waters. And it's like, I think it's from the early years until the March on Washington. And then the second one is Pillars of Fire. And then the third one is Canaan's Edge. Go buy them all right now. Just go buy them all. Anything Taylor, Branch, and Martin Luther King, you're doing good. Then, of course, Freedmen's Daughters. Finally, some scholarship about the women in the civil rights movement. Also read that. That's by Lynn Olson. Really good. Went to a talk at the Schomburg about it. Really good. So thank you, Jim. Yes. Go read their own words, and then also do research. Talk with other people. Talk with people who are knowledgeable and who have studied these people for their entire lives. We're in a time in our history where we can go on the internet and talk with historians that have dedicated their lives to studying these people. So it's so frustrating when people don't utilize it and just post things like this. And that's why I was so frustrated. Okay, and we have Aileen. And Aileen writes, Dr. King's 1963 letter. I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. I love this quote. Of course, it is a quote taken from a certain period in Dr. King's life, but it was echoed by many other civil rights leaders during the time and even today. Even at George Floyd's funeral the other day, you hear Reverend Al Sharpton calling out both moderate pastors who are silent, and in the Black community, pastors have a very high standing in the community, and they're silent when things are happening. He's also calling out people who are moderates who have been silent all this time and then all of a sudden waking up just now. So I would say there's a lot of validity here, and I think that a lot of white allies should really delve into these speeches and letters that Dr. King is passing back and forth. Also, Malcolm X talks a lot about the white moderate as well. I hope this is right, Darren. It's been amazing watching people white-splain MLK to his own children on Twitter. The entitlement runs so deep. Yes, I also saw that. There were people who would tell Martin Luther King Jr.'s children and family members about him and his legacy and what it should be. And I'm like, okay. Oh, we're going there. Yes, thank you for that. And then we have Lisa. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name. I disagree with your assessment that the police strategy is only using violence in isolated cases. Thousands of protesters have been maced, shot with rubber bullets, beaten, injured, maimed, blinded, ran over with SUVs, horses, by police all over this country. And most of the firsthand accounts from organizers, protesters, medics, are that police officers are the ones instigating violence indiscriminately against everyone: white, black, young, old, disabled, elderly, children, journalists, local politicians, all have been attacked by police while protesting police brutality. So I am not denying this by any means. What I am saying is that Dr. Martin Luther King's strategy, even Gandhi's strategy of nonviolence, it is successful because it was met with the sheer brutality of the system. And it was a level of cruelty and brutality that was splashed across newspapers and evening news. And it just really shamed the government. And so that's really what nonviolent strategies are best at. If you show someone who is not fighting back and is limp, and you are seeing someone sick a dog on them, beat them with a baton, it shames the government. What I'm saying is that the cases in which this is non-lethal force that they're using. And there are arguments that they are not using it at the appropriate times. They're overusing these non-lethal, quote unquote, because we know that some of these are absolutely lethal and have maimed people. Someone's lost an eye. There have been people who have died from being maced or tear gassed. But it is not at the level of brutality that makes these strategies really successful. Although I have seen since the clearing of the park across from the White House, we have seen a completely different tone. The sheer brutality of that and the selfishness of clearing out a park so that you can walk across the street. I think that is really where we're seeing nonviolent protests being really successful. If we can get a response out of police and showing their own brutality, that's when you see nonviolent protests being very successful. But as I said before, if you look at places like Albany, where the police were very strategic and not showing violence, Dr. King actually failed in those places. So I think we definitely need to study his legacy of nonviolence. And then also, we have something that Dr. King never had, and that's the internet. So it is a bit different now, but I do think that we're really actually making headway. We really are. We are really highlighting the unfair response that we're getting from the police in this. All right, next. And this is from Nicole. His strategy was taken from the teachings of Gandhi, who used passive protest in India to not only overcome the greatest empire in the history of man, questionable, the British Empire, but have them back out of the country and hand Indian rule back over to the people of India. No one is weaponizing or white-splaining the mythology and teachings of a great but flawed historical figure. They are merely pointing out that in a very different and heightened time in American history, he chose to use peace and compassion and intelligence and intellect against his oppressors, and the results, I don't think anyone can deny, were highly effective. It's important to remember at this time that we are living in the best time in the history of human civilization to live. Global poverty is at its lowest. Statistically, violence globally is at an all-time low. We in America, white, black, and all creeds, races, and genders, can sit on our $500,000 devices and have open, opinionated, not always honest, factual dialogue about the current going-ons in our society. So even though, unfortunately, we cannot turn back the hands of time and bring back George Floyd or undo terrible injustice that was done to him and many others before, calls to find a reasonable, peaceful solution that can move the whole of society forward, as should want the expectations of a Western educated democratic nation should not be cast aside or simply written off as white-splaining. I'd go so far to argue that Dr. King would not only agree with that, but that it is one of the key principles he stood for. Okay. So there is a lot here that I want to unpack. First and foremost, I think that you were triggered by my white-splaining comment, and it was meant to trigger you, hopefully to wake you up. I do believe that if you take a meme and in order to distract from protest, peaceful protest, and take the conversation away from police brutality, I do believe that you are, and you're boiling down Dr. King's entire legacy to just nonviolence. I do think that it's white-splaining. Sorry about it. Actually, not sorry about it. And it is being weaponized. His legacy is being weaponized to silence people. You cannot boil this man's legacy down to just nonviolence. And I think that it's a simplification of this highly intelligent individual as well as Gandhi. Both Gandhi and Martin Luther King, very flawed individuals, but we cannot deny their strategic genius. And I think that we really need to actually spend some time studying these individuals. So no, I did not say here anywhere that peaceful protest is invalid, or I don't believe in peaceful protest. I think it's wonderful that people are calling for peaceful protests, but I don't think that this meme actually is an attempt to encourage people to peacefully protest. This is a snarky meme that is intended to shame people for their emotions. It's an attempt to shame people and use Martin Luther King's nonviolent strategy as a weapon to shame and to silence people. And I'm not really going to budge away from that. And nowhere here did you really dismantle that at all. Yes, I agree that we're living in a wonderful time for people, for most people. I can sit here on my iPad. I've got a beautiful camera that's taking this video. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I should be like, well, I guess in exchange for a few Black people being shot down in the street unjustly by the police or strangled by the knee of a police officer, should I just brush that off? I'm not satisfied. And I definitely feel that we should continue to agitate. And once again, I would say that you're still simplifying Martin Luther King's and Gandhi's nonviolent strategies. Actually study their lives and their methods and strategies, and you'll realize how strategic it was. I think the next one is the Soprano List, like the name. I want to see this very same image with the following text instead. Looted nothing, burned nothing, attacked no one, still was killed. No further comment. I hope that this conversation was helpful to you. Please let me know down below if there's anything I could change or answer certain questions. Please let me know. Now, Juneteenth is coming up this week. Really excited, spend time with family and friends. I'll be doing some programming for it. But I've been getting a question about if white people can celebrate Juneteenth, and if so, what can they do? I definitely feel that all people should celebrate Juneteenth. It is the end of celebrating the end of slavery, but recognize that this is an internal holiday for the African American community. Respect those spaces. But I think that as white allies, you can take a few moments, take some time on Juneteenth and sit down with your family and come up with a list of things that you can do as a family to actually aid in the dismantling of this very racist system. Also, what are you going to do on a day-to-day basis? Concrete things on a day-to-day basis that can aid people of color, specifically African Americans in this country, and to dismantle racist systems. And I think that's a wonderful way to spend Juneteenth. Learning to become an active ally. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like us and subscribe, smash that bell. And I'll be back next Monday.